Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Bosakova, and I am a curator of photography. I come from Slovakia, and today I prepared the lecture on women in Slovak photography in the 20th century. As to my background, I worked and cooperated with the House of Photography in Bratislava for several years, coordinating and cooperating on the festival Month of Photography in Bratislava as a curator, as a production support, and as coordinator. I have also, for 6 years, worked on the most complex books on the history of European photography, which you can see on the screen, the history of European photography from 1900 to 2000. And this book is also my main source of information to build this lecture for you today. So I will be going through all my notes, and I will be showing you pictures. I have compiled this lecture exactly the way the book is compiled, which means into 3 different sections, periodical sections: 19 to 1938, 39 to 69, and 70 to 2000. And within these periods of times, I will be talking about the main female characters in Slovak photography, as well as I will be, of course, introducing them within the historical, geopolitical, and artistic context. I hope this time all the recording works well, because it's the 3rd time I'm doing this, but I hope this will give you a little insight into the main females in photography, a little bit of the historical background in Slovakia and in Europe as well. And of course, I hope you will enjoy what this lecture has to say. So let's start. On the screen, you can see now the first volume of the book, which is available in most of the universities and institutions in Europe now. This book was done by the House of Photography in Bratislava, and the main idea was to bring photography that is not well known a little bit more outside, so people see that there is not only French, German, or English photography, but there is more to it. So it comes from countries like Albania, Belarus, Ukraine, so 36 countries of Europe covered in each volume. But as for today, I will start talking a little bit about the background. So when we start in at the beginning of the 20th century, we have to say that until 1918, there was no such concept as Slovakia. You could not find it on any maps, not even within the monarchy. You could not find it anywhere. So it was only around 1918 when the idea that the Slovak intelligence, which was there but just was not on the maps, could go towards the Czechs and get together with the Czechs and become a proper nation which is visible. So this happened on 28th of October 1918, and when Czechoslovakia was formed and basically Slovakia appeared on the maps. So photography in the first half of the 20th century in Slovakia was marked and influenced mainly by rising number of photographic studios, especially in Bratislava. Around 1910, there were about 180 studios. This was the high number was due to a very low cost of all the technical technical equipment, low prices of the equipment. But the important thing that these photo studios brought was that amateur photography movement started to flourish and at the turn of the century, and especially in Bratislava, then called the Pressburg. And in 1908, the Pressburger Kunstverein, which is Bratislava's artist union, was formed and prepared the first photo exhibition. The Photo Club of Bratislava realized 2 exhibitions within 1913 and 1914. So the photo studios brought up a group of photographers who could actually produce and show their works already in that time. On the screen you can see maps. I find that very important to show because you can see the changes in the borders, and that was also important later on because of immigration, because of people, artists, photographers moving around. So you can see that there is no such thing as Czechoslovakia in 1914. Later on, 1919, Czechoslovakia appeared, and later it was also moved around. So even though many of the studios functioned only for few years, as I already, and eventually disappeared, as I already said, a society of photographers was formed, and this again allowed the founding of the first journal of photography in Slovak lands, the Fotografii Weekly, which was published in Hungarian, and it was published half Hungarian, half Slovak in 1904 in town called Nitra, which is a little bit outside of Bratislava. The photo studios functioned mainly for the middle class purposes, and in around 1920s, there were enough favorable conditions for creation of the first Slovak photographic unions and associations such as YMCA, Union of Slovak Photo Amateur Club, and also they published journal, the Photo Gazette, and so on. So photography did find its spot at the beginning of the 20th century. The beginnings were basically marked by a rather pictorialistic approach, even though the pictorialist photography did not really exist in Slovakia as it was known in other countries. But there was a certain inspiration by national folk or by ethnography, later on realistic document, which was documented mainly by male photographers such as Karol Plitzka, who you can see here, the folk, Pavel Sochaň, also, you know, more of an ethnography, journeys throughout Slovakia, or the realistic, little bit more realistic document by Prototopov. In the 20s in Slovakia, the photography was reflected changes in society, which of course happened in most of the countries. It always does reflect changes in society. But in Slovakia, it was specifically the development of industrialization and mass immigration. This also caused changes in the role of women within the family. New opportunities in the field of services in the cities arose. Young women traveled abroad to study or work as assistants for more successful photographers. And here they were able to acquire a certain skills, even though they were helping with minor tasks like lighting and maybe retouching. There was a group of female photographers that came out of this experience or this change, and especially the lack of men after the World War I, representing new opportunities for women. And as the interwar economic crisis began, the sociographic activities were pursued by mainly many left-wing intellectuals in various countries. Sarlo, a society representing Hungarian intelligence in Bratislava, began to organize or began pursuing and realizing different events. And gathered photographers who were visiting peripheries and backward towns and villages where they collected data about employment, poverty, working conditions, and so on. This information they collected was published as summaries, accompanied by visual documentation. The most notable, and here we come to the first woman photographer in the history of Slovak photography, one of the first anyway. There were 3 photographers, but not much documentations on the other ones is preserved. But no matter what, the most notable one is Irena Bluhova, whose picture you can see on the screen. And there was another one, Rosa Ney, a Hungarian living in France, and Barbara Zygmunt. But as I said, not much evidence of their work has been preserved. But Irena Bluhova was Hungarian born, and she represented some of the strongest arguments in the communist campaign against capitalism. She started taking images of beggars, unemployed people, cattle herders. And this was basically a reflected idea of joining reportage with an opinion of a particular social class, like it was articulated in the Union of Worker Photographers in Germany and published by the Worker Photographer magazine. What Irena Bluhova started was basically politically involved reportage. Here we are too far, but I wanted to show you more pictures on Irena Bluhova. So Irena Bluhova, she was a very, very interesting persona in Slovak photography. The House of Photography in Bratislava showed a larger exhibition of her works a couple of months ago. She belongs to the most significant persons in photography, as I mentioned. Her work represents the efforts to capture the reality of the society leading towards morally efficient and at the same time artistically poetical image. Her work is also connected with the interwar Central European avant-garde later on. She regarded the camera as visual diary. She always carried the camera to be able to capture what was happening, to capture the people, to capture at the beginning the poverty, as said, but also the herders and so on. Her early images show plastic and suggestive picture of social poverty in Slovakia in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century. What was interesting was that she has become a part of the Communist Party, where she had 2 positions. First was agitating, colporting election leaflets, and the second one was sociographical, where she was helping organizing public strikes and gatherings. Her camera was always with her. She believed that the communist country, that the Communist Party is a communist party with human face, which it was at that time. And she was really dedicated to working with them. She also became, in the 30s, she was a communist entering the Bauhaus. She did that simply because for her, photography was not a luxury. For her, photography was basically the way how to understand life and how to combine art and life. And that's why she wanted to experiment more. She wanted to come out of this reportage-like photography and starting to experiment, so to understand also the artistic part of photography. So as said, she visited Bauhaus. She studied there for 1 year, and after, obviously, she had time and possibilities to experiment a little bit more with developing processes. She used double exposures. Okay. So she used double exposures. She experimented, explored the relationship between photography and typography, and composed still lifes as well. After a year, she returned. At this point, new objectivity represented an appeal of its times, and it was like an omen of the arriving 30s, bringing an end to radical utopias, changing them into anguish and disillusion. She returned to Bratislava a year after. This is a little bit further. A year after, and she was appointed by the Communist Party to be a head of a bookshop, which was supposed to gather reliable people in case of a secret political actions organized by the Communist Party. The bookshop has later became part of cultural and art scene. They organized exhibitions, and also the bookshop became the center of anti-fascist solidarity, connected with the Arbeitshilfe organization, who was also the publisher of Neue Deutsche Verlag, showing also her own images. She was helping the unwanted personas of the regime to hide and to leave the country. But of course, the bookshop was found by Gestapo and was closed. She had to run into illegality. And she lived in illegality for years at the very east of Slovakia, in Humene. She basically returned there and she captured the life. Again, she went back to capturing life of ordinary people, but a lot of her pictures were burned in a fire when she had to go into hiding again. So that was Irena Bluhova. In the 20s, there was no close connection between the Slovak photographic scene and the scenes in Germany or France. This basically happened after the Bauhaus. School became a significant influence on young generations of photographers. After the establishment of the worker photographers movement in Germany, an exhibition Filmum Foto in Stuttgart in 1929 was organized, and that's when authors emerged in Slovakia too in the second half of the 20th century, and they supported the idea of photography as a tool of political struggle. Following the example of, right, here we go. I hope this can be seen. No, sorry. Right, okay, that was Irena Bluhova. So following the example of German Bauhaus, the School of Applied Arts in Bratislava was founded in 1928, and it became an important avant-garde school. Its objective was to improve domestic industrial production in terms of craft and artistic respect. The school structure and educational concept were decisively influenced by German Bauhaus. In the second half of the 30s, so-called urban reportage was discovered, but there are no significant women in this part who were participating in the movement. Photographic production did not exist independently from the state. In the 30s, conservative traditional tendencies intensified so much that the existence of the School of Applied Arts, School of Applied Arts was under the threat of distinction. Right, okay. So I am sorry, I have to find the lecture. I have to go back to some of my notes. Okay. Share. Right. So we are here again. And we are here. So hopefully you can see. So it was under the threat a little bit of extinction or disappearance. The first change happened in 1938 after the proclamation of Slovak autonomy and the appointment of the first Slovak parliament. And at this point, a dictatorship in Slovakia was built, employing extreme nationalism, nationalist slogans, influence of Nazis, Nazism and fascism grew globally, stronger, and intensified the fears about the future of Czechoslovakia. As the atmosphere in the society changed radically, journals published almost exclusively propagandist pictures, and type of photography received and this type of photography received recognitions at exhibitions and photographic competitions as well. The period from 1939 was marked by constant change in political setups and powers. Beginning of the World War II, establishment of Slovak state, short but dark period in Slovak history, Hitler in power, end of the war, and establishment of totalitarian regime in the 50s, and then easing into 60s, which was interrupted by the Russian invasion. All of these events had radical impact on art and photography. Photographers were either influenced and shaped by those events, or they just simply had to submit to it and to the political requirements. On March 14, 1939, Josef Tiso and Adolf Hitler agreed on secession of Slovakia from Czechoslovakia, and Slovak state was built and became a state under the protection of Germany and Hitler powers. They built a history of authoritarian governments in Slovakia, and in between 1945 and 48, when a democratic Czechoslovakia was restored, totalitarian governments controlled both societal and cultural affairs, of course, in a decisive manner. The situation was changed only by the democratic revolution in 1989. Yet in September 38, all political parties, except for the ruling party in Slovakia, were banned. An office of propaganda was created. And the first anti-Jewish laws appeared after March 39, when Tiso signed the pact with Hitler. 80,000 Jews were reported to concentration camps, and Slovakia entered the war on the side of the Nazi Germany. For the cultural point, the accession of Slovak Nazis to power resulted in the cancellation of the modernist school of arts and crafts in the summer of 39. The establishment of Office of Propaganda yet highlighted the importance of propaganda in politics. And only after 39, propaganda became, so to speak, industrial discipline. Officials with Office of Propaganda ensured that images in the press and in countless exhibitions monumentalized leaders of the Slovak state. Shots slightly from below, who were consistently accompanied by state, religious, and Nazi symbolism. The second fundamental use of photographs of the Slovak state consisted of photographic reconstruction of historical events, which were mainly about war reportage. Propaganda, well, as we know, used cropping and retouching simply to make the central themes supporting the state ideology stronger. The purpose of this process was to manipulate public opinion. In Tiso's state, the periodicals such as New Slovakia, New Youth, New Europe, New Order appeared, and here we can see exactly the reconstructions or the propaganda used. Czechoslovakia was restored in 1945. The communist coup in February 48 returned the entire state into the totalitarian era. The apparatus of repression was strengthened, and the secret security forces, the police and the army, were in power. Society was completely dominated by censorship. This new power seeped into all segments of society. Within a few years, the Communist Party gained complete control. In 1953, after the death of Joseph Stalin, Klement Gottwald became the president, and the terrors eased a little bit. But still, in the early 50s, photography was supposed to be photography almost as a people's militia. Society was dominated by ideological and cultural dogmatism. The state determined that the only accepted style was so-called social realism. Here we have one of the examples by Ladislav Noel. All the images were submitted to through the Czechoslovak press office, and of course were censored and manipulated into what was accepted. Ideology disappeared very late, and in the beginning of the 60s, we can see a little bit shift towards the fundamental facts of human existence. In the contrast to the efforts to achieve artistic stylization in reportage, there was a tendency towards dynamic reportage. This was about being in harmony with the current trends in the world of journalist photography. The incoming generation did not see so-called pure photography in lyrical stylization. Pure photography was seen in reportage and in journalism, which seemingly renounced any stylization and strived to bring the more accurate and adjusted rough record of the situation. One of the female representatives, again, after Bluhova, we have Markéta Luskačová. Markéta Luskačová was a sociologist. She was part of the group called Protest 1966, together with other authors who tried to change the orientation of photography and return the freedom of expression into the image. She was documenting Slovak religiosity, where the conflict between the archetypal and the modern became visible. The way what she brought into photography was dynamic reportage. In Slovakia, rather than a systematic depiction in the spirit of surrealism, one can encounter individual features and deviation from the focal points of the authors, such as surrealistic influences. This is still Markéta Luskačová that you can see. Before the pardoning of surrealism in the 60s, only Magdalena Robinsonová was, who was the first Slovak professional photographer who actually finished school, professional school, State Graphic School in Prague. She was the only person to graduate, and she applied the principle of surrealistic metamorphosis and objective coincidence in her work. Her work from the end of the 40s, here we can see only the work of, okay, we start here. From the 40s began to move towards the program of peripheral society in the city centers. So she saw such topics as dead-end street, yard of the poor, targets from a shooting range, ruined cemeteries, and so on. And for example, forgotten drawings and decaying doors as testimonial walls. And testimonial walls. Whoa, sorry, this was a little bit too far. For example, this drawings, chalk drawings on the walls, actually today it would be called a graffiti, appeared in Slovak photography for the very first time. The imaginative, so here we have Robinsonová in the 60s. And this was so she was traveling a lot. She had the privilege to travel, and she had a kind of imaginative undertone in her photographs that could not occur before in the 50s. It returned in the extensive reportage from her journeys across Italy between 1959 and 60, which is dominated by abandoned and left to themselves objects. This is one of the images you can see here. And she also worked together with Arnold Lustig on a reportage in Israel. But this book, because of normalization coming into power, entering the country, Arnold Lustig had to leave, and everything they gathered together had to be just stopped, so they could not release the book until after the 70s. So in the 60s, photography did not live in isolation from current fine art trends or movements. In the 60s, their transposition into photographic areas was witnessed. Structural abstractions in painting influenced part of photographic words, and this helped to separate from photography and relatively independent group known as abstract structural photography. Beside these influences, we can observe a reaction to op art, pop art, and at the end of the 60s, also concept art. Here we are going to another significant female figure in the history of Slovak photography in the 60s, but she Zuzana Minacheva is still alive. She's 92. Last year, she got the award Persona of Slovak Photography, and she is still working. She's still photographing. She's like the main photographer of the film festival in Karlovy Vary. So, Zuzana Minacheva, she, together with Olga Blejova and Martin Martinček, were inseparable part of the first Slovak New Wave, which appeared in the 60s. I'm saying first because the next one, next Slovak New Wave, which is more intense and kind of notable, started in the 80s. So Zuzana Minacheva started her photographic experience. She started quite late, to be honest. She was 40 when she really became an art photographer, and when she realized that there is more just portraiture, because that's how she started. She started working in film studio, where she started working behind the camera, and then was offered to become a photographer for the film studio. So she had access to movies and behind the scenes, and also access to many famous people, celebrities of the period of the time, whom most of them she became friends with. She photographed most of them. She photographed the artistic scene, not only celebrities from movies, but later on it were artists, it were actors, artists, writers, and everybody who you can just imagine. She was the core of this scene at the end of 60s. She had incredible sense to manipulate her objects into the position that she wanted, and so she could capture the image she wanted, but she never made them uncomfortable. I can say this because there is a couple of movies about Zuzana Minacheva, and she says that, and her friends and all the people she portrayed say the same. So, as I said, she started working later on for Karlovy Vary Festival, and she remained there until this day. Her first exhibition in 1967 was called Better to be Clever in Hell Than Stupid in Heaven. This exhibition presented few series which were a symbolical picture of an ordinary life. What I am showing you now is her first works. It's from her first exhibition. And she pictured, first she pictured all these walls and places where symbolisms of communism and socialism were placed. So she captured all of these and combined it in an exhibition. And this is called The Visit. Sorry about this. I put it other way around in my notes. So this is called, this series is called A Visit. It's a series of photographs which is paradoxical epilogue to the photographic analogies of gestures and informal paintings. She created a series of shots of writings on walls, hastily and carelessly painted over, which protested the occupation of Czechoslovakia by troops of the Warsaw Pact. The unfitting white stains and areas on the dark background of the walls, a kind of street censorship instead of street happenings, foreshadow the character of the era that was about to begin. So this is from that exhibition, and this is the series Visit. And what I was talking about is the better to be clever in hell and stupid in heaven was in 1967 an exhibition which presented series where a symbolical picture of an ordinary life, cycle time, where her works let's go to Zuzana Minachova. And here you can see the picture. The main object in the series is an egg as a symbol of temporary lightness of an ordinary life. Game is another cycle which she created in the 60s, where she uses different tonality and symbols and a collage. So this was a little bit more into her experimenting. So she comes from the horse to this kind of pictures. They were exhibited last year or this year in the Fog Gallery. And here we are coming to Blejova. So in the 70s, Zuzana Milachova started adjusting her portraits, which we can see here. And also created new portrait using, for example, a tree. That was actually one of her favorite. She was using a lot of the natural kind of input. So this is her later work. She was obsessed with trees. I hope you can see this, because last time some of the pictures dropped out. And here we have game, and again, trees. So it's a very variable works. She experimented, she combined colors, egg still present. Zuzana Minachova. The next I mentioned, when mentioning Zuzana Minachova, I also mentioned Olga Blejova, another almost forgotten persona in Slovak photography. She was born in 1930, died in 2019. She belongs to the generation of Slovak photographers that emerged on the art scene in the 60s and 70s and was open to experimenting in photography. She brought kind of sense of imagination and poetism into photography, and conveyed her female view into a thoroughly articulated message. Her nudes can without any doubt be considered among her most distinctive work, but she started with illustrations. She was illustrating books of poems. She was illustrating TV programs. You know, she created images for television, for theater, and so on. However, the most significant of her works is act. She has become the icon of photo act, and throughout her career, she kept coming back to the topic. Characteristics of her image is simplification of the body into some kind of an essence. Oh, whoa. This we are a little bit too far. Which is, however, still identifiable. She was always, this is her, no, this is Lyubomela. Sorry, we are a little bit too far. Showing you the image of Olga Bleyova. This was a text written by Zuzana Lapitkova. So she was always looking for added value to her images, and she was always looking into new technological solutions or different papers, adding color, or just simply adding color into black and white photographs, or simply just trying to work with the body. There are two parallel lines in her image of act. First is more graphical. She works with the contours of the body eliminated into a 2D effect with limited light and shadow into white and black, as you can see. And second line of works is with the light and shadow in almost sculptural manner. The scale of the gray fills in the mass of the body torso and admits its 3D effect. Both lines exist together and often overlay each other. This is later works. Another important characteristic is the motive of multiplying of the image by mirroring in one shot without additional collage or overlaying of the image. Bleyova was always looking for new ways of visual result, as well as using different context. This is still Olga Bleyova. And her later works. So that was Olga Bleyova. And here we are going almost into the 70s. So after the occupation of Czechoslovakia in August 1968, the establishment of the normalization policy within the photographic field did not take very long. Structural abstraction became one of the targets for so-called consolidators. According to one of them, experimental techniques are not suitable for independent original work. They are not photographs anymore, but images created by the accidental use of photographic paper and laboratory processes. Structural abstractions disappeared from galleries and magazines. Finally, the link between manipulated and non-manipulated static photography is not in dispute. Both of the above-mentioned categories use both shape association and structural abstraction. In addition to these types of trends, manipulated photography included only its own tendencies, one of which is a symbolic montage. The emergence of inscenated or arranged photography in the second half of the 60s was influenced by the renaissance of surrealism and also by fashion photography, in particular in Avedon's and Sief's works, which an affinity and admiration for secession symbolism and neo-romanticism is apparent. At this time, authors who seemingly no longer distinguished between art and life, who simply lived art, can be seen. One of the personas in Slovak photography in this connotation is Luba Laufova. She was one of the authors who exhibited in the most almost a manifest exhibition in Prague in 1969 together with other young artists, and they just arranged for the camera with joyful ease, game, and confrontations. The category of arranged photography can be divided into two groups. In the first group, authors created fiction by using only props, while the second used actors as well. The escalation of absurd cruelty and pessimism peaked in the image by Luba Laufova. For Laufova, the inscenation of props was characterized by an awareness of disillusion, the confrontation between the ideal and decay and degradation. So here we're starting with some of the images by Luba Laufova. By the words of other curators, she was sensual, nostalgic, playful, and intense. She was capable of capturing the worlds inside in her documentary images at the beginning of the 70s. She defined the Slovak image, the image of Slovak art photography. Her vision oscillates on the edge between staged images and aestheticization of the scene by different expressive means, mainly light as well as fogging and sharpening. She photographed acts, resulting in showing captivating and hidden beauty. The way she composed the image was at the time against the conventions of the era, despite liberal 60s. In the nudes, she showed spots that were hidden before. Still, they did not look vulgar. And she was absolutely not afraid to create outside of the mainstream. At the end of the 60s, procedures for specific photographic techniques began to penetrate into the inscenated photography. Games in front of the lens shifted to games in the darkroom, which gain an increasing importance. The presence of the Sabatier effect, colorizing, sketching, use of coarse materials, soft drawings, toning was constantly increasing. Stylization by paratheatrical means was not sufficient, as authors desired deepening by special photographic procedures. The growing presence of photographic series and sets is also characteristic for the 60s. And here we are turning into the 70s. Let me go here. Okay, this is not the treasures, sorry. Right. So with the occupation of Czechoslovakia by the five Warsaw Pact armies on the 2nd of August 68, began the over two decades of age of motionlessness. The occupation definitely shattered the illusion. Shattered the illusion of socialism with a human face and of the reformability of communism. The establishment of the federation in 69 raised mainly on the Slovak side high expectations. in terms of strengthening independence and coexistence with the Czechs. Beginning in the late 60s and early 70s, efforts aimed at the emancipation of photography as an art form produced the concept of so-called art photography. Here I am just showing some maps again after a while. And I don't know what's happening here. Okay. Well, just go here. Okay, I stopped. Lovely. Sorry about this. I have no idea what's happening. What is happening? Right, okay. No idea. No idea. Right. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. I have to pause this. Pause. Okay. Okay. What? Hello again. Hello back. I hope I am back. I don't know what happened here and why I have disappeared. I'm sorry about this. No. Right, I'll pause it again. I am sorry. I have no idea what's happening. So I have to start again. And I'm not fucking starting again, am I? Okay, guys, I have disappeared, but I don't know what's happening. Well, so I was talking about the occupation of Czechoslovakia and establishment of the federation. I have to see if I am still recording. Yeah, I am still recording. Beginning in the late 60s and early 70s, efforts aimed at the emancipation of photography as an art form produced the concept of so-called art photography. At all costs, photographers wanted to get closer to be an equal part of the art scene and with the artist. Through photographic means, they wanted to achieve the effect of a work of art. This was at the same time that the visual arts wanted to rid themselves of artistic visuality and artistry in general, wanted to get out of art, and when some successful photographers proudly began to title themselves artistic photographers. The ruling regime at the time supported this type of empty art photography while avoiding socially urgent problems, so the protagonists acquired a decent social status and security. New forms of photography were seeping through the amateur environment, and the University of FAMU, rather than in the area of galleries and state-subsidized commissions. Within a broadened generational grouping of authors, which include graduates from the School of Applied Arts in Bratislava and students of FAMU in Prague, an exemplary position is reserved for Judita Čáderová. In a way, she is a counterweight to the lavish baroque boisterousness that affected and the determinative majority of the generation. To the contrary, Čáderová puts emphasis on detail and uses it to its maximum extent. She has the educational background, which is reflected in her extraordinary sensitivity and processing finesse. Dreamy, imaginative thinking and traces of the dominance of the subject over the subject. However, as with the already mentioned authors, Judita Čáderová created her own style and own world. The focus of her approach to art is a combination of elemental photographic thinking with the sophistication of an aesthete. Čáderová resigns from complicated and unique technological manipulations in the darkroom. She prefers blur, transformation of motifs through detail, reflection in a mirror, and the distortion of the dark surface of the convex face. Okay. Her characteristic is constant interest in experimenting. The core of her work is stage photography, self-portraits, and large format photographs. Dreamy, portraits, self-portraits, using different techniques, marks in the sand. Judita Čáderová. In the 70s, Luba Laufová, who was already mentioned before, also came back. And has drawn the principle of classical modern art into the development in Slovak photography. So in the 70s and 80s, she used collage. Why is this not working? Oh, maybe because it's the last picture. So she uses collage and montages. but she also captured famous artists. Okay, this is the Slovak New Wave. So let's start at the beginning. We have seen Judita Čaderová. Towards the 80s, the political and the social background started to change a little bit. There was call for more freedom and for the fall of communism, obviously, which started between 1985 and 1987. Various activities gradually began to cross links and were preparing the ground for the system change in November 1989. Documentary groups work. There was lots of documentary groups working underground, conceptual and action art in place. Significant figure of the period of time between 60s and still now is Milota Havrankova, who is considered to be an exceptional phenomenon in Slovak and Czech photography. She entered the art scene in the late 60s, at a time when experimental staged photography was beginning to assert its position within the wider context of fine arts. She experiments, breaks traditions, transforms and innovates her personal style, demonstrating her own uncompromising attitude to owner's inner artistic freedom. The key motivator of Milota Havrankova's work is her desire to discover herself and her world throughout seemingly detached and yet objective technical methods. Her work process shows first and foremost her uncompromising stance on the question of artistic freedom. Always artistic freedom. The center of gravity of the view from the window cycle is her is the author's work in the hectic 1960s and 70s, a time that the Czechoslovak society experienced not only euphoria, but also a crushing skepticism and moral destruction due to the incoming normalization. In the background of these images, Milota Havrankova's work crystallized. She oscillated between individual artistic freedom and political oppression. She found the base for her work in exploring her own truth from a fictitious reality. In the mid-80s, Slovakia was not very rich with respect to contacts to the world. During this period, a new movement was formed in photography. This is still Milota Havrankova, called Slovak New Wave. I've already mentioned it with Zuzana Mináčová, which in many respects articulated the principles of postmodernism. Here we have one of the examples. In a way, it was a response to the social humanistic photography, which aimed to improve the world, but ultimately did not achieve any visible change. Young authors saw the break away from the boundaries of the nationalism of post-conceptual art, which, while emphasizing the importance of meaning, relegated to the background of the emotional value of an artwork. They realized the value of subjectivism with confronting those photographic personalities who, through passion for experiment, were able to connect with the succeeding generation. Ljubav for Slovak New Wave. Until the 90s, documentary photography did not use color. The last decade of the 20th century signaled a change. Color documentary photography had reached the level of black and white photography. The last decade of the past century was characterized by multiple and continuous changes in live photography. The more serious changes include an increased rate of subjectivization, taking a deep look at themselves. In the 70s, we could witness the photograph as a personal and private object. In the 90s, an increase in intimacy became obvious. The authors dragged the immediate surrounding into the photograph, and the black hole of the subject absorbs everything around them. In the 90s, Slovakia, a new and in its own way revolutionary technology was starting to break through. The photographs was not created through chemistry, but through an electronic impulse. The spread of mixed media installations, which flooded exhibitions halls in the 80s and 90s, helped us to talk about the post-photographic era. In other words, a period when, thanks to technology, the understanding of the media has fundamentally changed. Has fundamentally changed. Since the turn of the century, photography has consisted of three synchronous layers, so-called live photography, pure photography, and intellectual photography. In terms of diachronicness, each layer streams in subordinate to its own ideals and values. What is happening in its immediate photographic victimity is less important than what happens in its extensive system in the past. And here are a few more pictures from Milota Havrankova works, because I did not show enough. And Milota Havrankova has a couple of years ago started her own Milota Havrankova's Foundation, where she promotes not only her photography, but photography of many young, mainly female artists. So as for the 20th century, I have tried to show you the most important persons in photography of that period of time, in periodically divided into what's happening into periods of times which were important from the historical and political background. I hope this will give you a little insight into what has been happening within the scene and gave you some maybe inspiration into to look maybe more deep into it, or at least to see what we had. And I think the photographic world, Slovak world, has been quite lucky and rich with really good quality images by really great artists of the century. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this. I am sorry about the pause. I am sorry about any technical complications. I have no idea what happened, but hope you will enjoy it. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.